We want to create an experience here where our messages and the key messages primarily are going to be banging around in heads after they get home.
Welcome to No More Bad Events, a fun and insightful podcast for professional event organizers and for anyone at any level interested in producing nothing but the best events. Each week, we'll talk with legendary event professionals to get an inside look into what they think makes a great event. And in the process, we'll draw out insider secrets, non-traditional approaches, and compelling stories from the most captivating personalities in the business. We'll definitely get the skinny on reaching that one big goal: no more bad events. I'm your host, Scott Bloom, comedian, event MC, and now your podcast host. Let's get started. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers, the most trusted, easy-to-use, full-service online platform for finding, connecting with, and hiring the best keynote speakers, hosts, and presenters in the world. With the deepest catalog of professionals available through the eSpeakers marketplace, you can be assured that the speaker you book will be the absolute best speaker based on your goals, bar none. eSpeakers, the #1 way to find your next perfect speaker. For more information, go to espeakers.com. My guest today on the podcast is my good friend, Mike Bonheim. And did you hear the sincerity in my voice when I said, my good friend, Mike Bonheim? Would it surprise you to know that I didn't really know Mike too well until this podcast? That's just my showbiz showing. The fact of the matter is, we really have only known each other through reputation and occasionally some witty banter back and forth on a LinkedIn post or a Facebook post. We did finally get to work together briefly last month on a big pharmaceutical meeting. We weren't on site together, but we did have a quick Zoom call before the event. So up until this podcast, we really hadn't had an opportunity to sit down and chat and get to know each other. But I'm really glad I did. You know, I always knew he'd be a great guy. Maybe one day he will be a good friend. I think after this podcast, we got to know each other a little better. Look, I always assumed he was smart, funny, and creative, which was definitely confirmed on the podcast. But during our chat, I also learned that he's insightful, he's conscientious, and always wants the best for his clients. Now, Mike has been in the event biz for a while, and that's why I've known his name. He's a communication strategist and creative director with more than 15 years of experience in delivering experiential events. Mike knows how to ask the one big question that most always lands a great event: why? You know, we've been hearing a lot about that. What's your why? Well, Mike wants to know what the why is. See, Mike's position is that once you understand the why, you can come to the party, so to speak, with relevant ideas that resonate. Mike has a lot of other cool perspectives. He talks about the knee-jerk no's and how to navigate them. He talks about being eager to be wrong and, get this, how he loves to hear what a client may hate about an idea. He's constantly trying to learn more about his clients so he can better match their vision. And he shares what he thinks the greatest event successes should look like. And for Mike, it's not necessarily about the wow. It's about hearing that the audience has left saying that attending the event was worth their time. And for all of you event professionals out there looking for solid, creative, strategical approaches, Mike is an exceptional collaborator too. He sincerely believes that great partnerships come from everyone's area of expertise, and it's just a matter of listening and being open. Speaking of listening, wait till you hear what my good friend Mike has to say. Look, there I go again. I can't help myself. My good friend Mike is with us. Look, maybe one day he will truly be a good friend. I think we're almost there. I mean, he was a great guest, and we definitely had a great conversation. I admire him, and I respect him even more after speaking with him. So I think we're on our way to becoming really good friends. I don't know what you think, Mike, if you're listening to this, but I'm up for it. If you want to be a good friend, I'll put in the time. So let's listen into my conversation with my potential best friend, Mike Bonheim. And also, you know, coming from producing to booking, to creative, you know what's possible. You might have an idea, you know how to execute it. I'm sure everyone knows what a creative director does, but what are your main responsibilities? What do you bring to a project? I mean, obviously you're going to take some intake from the client, but they're looking to you, your ground zero, to say, hey, this is the vision I have. This is the direction I think you would create the best event for you.
Yeah, I think that the first step is, and it depends very much on the client. It depends very much on the project, depends very much on your experience with that client. I'll correct one thing you said. I don't like to think that it's my vision that is of the show. I like to think that it's the client's vision that I help them discover. And in order to do that, I need to, first of all, really understand their business. I need to really understand what are their true business objectives with any event. What is their messaging objective? What's their competitive landscape like? What are any big announcements that might be coming out at the event, before the event, shortly after the event? I need to understand, and a lot of times it's something that a client really has not spent too much time thinking about, interestingly. I need to understand the audience. What does the audience want to hear? What does the audience need to hear? What are the hard messages the audience might need to swallow? So I need to truly understand the strategic objectives of whatever the campaign is, if it's a live event or if it's a virtual event or if it's a print campaign or whatever it might be. I need to really understand what are the objectives, what are the messages. And then the creative comes in what's the way that I can tell that story and reach those objectives in a way that is going to keep your audience's attention. Because we could very easily read a white paper and they're not going to retain it. And so I feel like the goal of creative is to maintain attention, because attention leads to retention, and retention leads to execution in the field, or in, when your customers get back to their offices, or after the event. Really everything, the goal is after the event. We want to create an experience here where our messages, and the key messages primarily, are going to be banging around in heads after they get home. So it's understanding strategy, understanding objectives, and then saying, here's a real neat way that we can capture people's attention so that those messages really resonate.
So what you're talking about is a real strong partnership between you and the company you're working with and the client. How do you build up their trust to let them know, we talked a little bit about constantly fighting this knee-jerk no reaction from clients because they say, oh, no, we can't do that, or there's fear around it. How do you get them over that hump? I know it's a lot about trust. I know it's a lot about, hey, we've seen you do it before, but how do you work them through that process so that you're looking to give them the best possible experience? How do you get them to make that leap sometimes?
The knee-jerk no is something that I talk about a lot because it happens on production teams. It happens between production and creative. It happens between agency and client. It happens within client teams. And it all comes down to a level of, obviously level of trust, as you're saying, but it comes down to rejecting assumptions. And very often it happens on the agency side when you've got a client that's a little bit difficult for one reason or another. And not that any of us have ever had a difficult client.
No, it never happens.
No. Maybe it's because they are too sure and they want this and that's what they want and they will not be open to input. Or maybe it's that they're very unsure and they don't even really have a clear idea of what they want to say. Or maybe it's that they're hard to physically reach. They're very slow on responses. There's lots of different ways that an agency and client relationship can be taxed. And what ends up happening to that is that when a client comes with a request, people say, oh, here they go again. Now they want this, or now they're not telling us that. And it just makes you want to push back. What I like to say, and that's one kind of knee-jerk no, and the other is like you're saying, on the client side, when you come forward with an idea and they automatically want to discount it because it didn't come from them. It's that assumption that you don't know their business or whatnot. I like to say that there is no. If a client has a request, and let's say it's impossible, they want to fly a 747 into the middle of general session, obviously, no, you can't do that. You have to step back and say, all right, why? Right? For every request, there's a why. For every reaction, there is an emotion. So you have to understand the why. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then say, okay, so now we've got the objective. The 747 in the general session, that was an execution, not the objective. The objective was showing the scale of our business in aerospace, whatever it might be. So now once you've identified the why, what are we trying to achieve, you can start coming at it with different creative ideas. I think that another way to get a client past a knee-jerk no is to be very open to being wrong. First of all, clients are always hesitant to tell you what's wrong with it. They don't want to hurt your feelings. They wish that it was right. They really want it to be right. And they're afraid to say no. And when they do say, yeah, that's not really right, people have a tendency to get defensive. They want to defend their idea. And you got to throw that out. You got to be not only open, but eager to be wrong. Because if you hit something out of the park on your first try, all you've learned is that this was a good idea. You don't really know why. If you've said, what about this? They say no. You can say, okay, great. Why didn't that work? And you can start understanding why this was a good idea when you eventually get there. So I always say to clients, never be afraid to tell me you hate an idea. If you hate an idea, I want you to say, I hate that idea, because I learned more from the misses than I do from the hits.
And through that interaction, through that relationship, we were talking about building trust. They realize that you're there for their best interest. You're there to explore and to help them get to where they need to go. I love this idea of finding out why. What is there? It really comes down to the objective. It also comes down to an emotional response to an idea. So, I know that you like to create projects that are obviously objective driven. There needs to be strategy. You are trying to come up with this sort of one-of-a-kind experience, something that's specific to them. How do you get to that one-of-a-kind? What does one-of-a-kind mean for you? Is it the audience has never seen it, the client hasn't seen it? Because just from speaking with you, I know this is going to be less about you and more about them. You're not in it to go, hey, look at me, I came up with a great idea. I'm trying to find the perfect idea for you. So how do you accomplish that?
It's just like what we were saying before, that it's not my vision, it's the client's vision that we help bring to life, right? And I also like to say that it's not my show, it's their show. I just help them put it on stage. One of the ways I like to do that is by eliminating anything that I could poke a hole in as being arbitrary. Everything that we do and every decision we make, and again, going back to the why, should have a why. Okay, so you wanted to put, and this actually just happened on a show I got back from the day before yesterday. You want to put these atomic columns on either side of the stage, and you want to pick this particular design of atomic column. Why?
Why?
You need to have an answer, right? You need to have an answer. And in this case, it just so happens that the logo of this product we were launching had a very predominant 3 vertical lines in it. And so I said, oh, well, we could bring that to life in these atomic columns. And you know what? There's an atomic column that's built of vertical lines. So now when you look at this scenic and we've got that big product logo in the middle, we've got these 3 lines and they're mirrored on either side of the stage and the whole thing feels cohesive. Now, the reality is, if you grabbed 100 people in that audience on the way out of general session and said, tell me about the scenic, not one of them would say, oh, well, I noticed that there were lines in the columns and they've actually, none of them would notice that. But it's my belief that when you pay that much attention to detail and that every detail really does have a purpose and a why, the overall impact is changed. It has more of that cohesive feel. And therefore, everything you're saying from stage fits into that non-arbitrary, purposeful design.
Yes, that everything sort of is going towards that same point of view, whether they are conscious of it or not. They know something just feels right. It amplifies the experience. I know a lot of people who might be listening to this podcast. We have a lot of event professionals, all different positions, all different types of responsibilities. But a lot of times things are maybe, and no disrespect to any meeting planners out there, they're like, hey, we can plan this meeting, we can put it together. What would you tell those folks who would say, here is the advantage of bringing in someone like me or a company that has a creative director that is strategy and objective driven?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is a meeting planner could put on an event. They very well could. A client could put on an event by themselves. I think that it's a matter of respecting everyone's area of expertise and listening to people who might have the experience that you might not have. Just like I would not suggest that I'm going to be able to put together the best registration system or even the best banquet experience. I would look to the meeting planner who's the expert in that to do it, just like I would not expect or purport to be able to develop the client for a client's speech. They're the experts in the content. They know their business. They know their objectives. They know what they need to achieve and want to say. I can come in and tell them the best way to say, how do you want to say that? Because in the live events world, where our expertise comes in, is in sitting in the seat of the audience. And I made mention to this before that very often clients don't really know what their audience needs to hear or wants. They think they do. And they know what they want to tell them for sure. They know, oh, this is my sales force. I want to tell them, get out there and sell more, which it so very often is. But they don't really know what the audience needs to hear or wants to hear. And that's where we come in. We were able to take an understanding of the audience mindset and how things hit ears and eyes and what they want to say and find where they cross, find where those two things have commonality so that we can take that message and deliver it in a way that's going to resonate with that audience.
Well, what about companies that have their marketing department? They're very heavily involved in the meeting. How do you bring a different perspective from, let's say, the creatives in marketing?
Well, we use their messages heavily and we lean on them heavily and we listen to them intensively, acutely. We always want to hear what the marketers have to say because there's so many reasons, but brand consistency of message, consistency of, especially with the sales group, you want to make sure that what your sales team hears and what you want your customers to hear are very well aligned. So the viewpoint of the marketing team is absolutely critical, 100% critical for determining that message. Where they may not have the experience and ability is, like I was saying, transitioning that into a movie, if you will. And
a live event experience.
It's that live event stage experience, whether it's stage, whether it's screen, whether it's audio, whatever happens to be coming together. How do those things integrate into a live audience experience where you have them for an hour as opposed to a 30-second TV commercial where your method of communication is so drastically different? And that's where our expertise comes in.
Do you have any moments that come to mind, like proud moments of, as in your job as a creative director, where you took something that was maybe, a simple idea and you still think about it today? We really blew them out of the water. I'm sure you have a few of them, but anyone come to mind?
It's interesting because the blew them out of the water that makes me the most proud, quite honestly, doesn't come from, well, that was a really cool opening number, doesn't come from, oh, well, they really used the pyrotechnics in that and it was so, so cool. It's when I get feedback from a client that what they heard from their audience was worth my time. I've had many experiences where a client wanted to have a big splash, something just production wow. And, I think that a big splash can be an objective. That if that is an objective, that can be a valid objective. But I've had experiences where we had a really cool, big splash wow experience. But the feedback was, I could have watched it on TV, or there's no reason that I had to leave my territory to come here to see, X, Y, or Z artist perform. It didn't do anything for my business, Then there's the experiences where they said that really impacted my business. That really gave me the tools that I need to be successful. That's where I feel like we've done our job. It's not really a fun answer.
No, I think that's an excellent answer because, as you said, they can bring in that big speaker, that big name, and everyone's talking about that, or they can have that opening number. But at the end of the day, you want to have a little ROI, and sometimes that's very nebulous. You can't really sometimes gauge that, but sometimes you can when you start hearing people talk about time has become precious these days, and people are like, why did you send me to this meeting for 3 days? I could have been out in the field making money. So the idea that the audience, you can get a sense that the audience got something from it, that is, I guess, your ultimate objective.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes that comes through in extremely unexpected ways. And I'll give you an example. This is not something that I did myself at all. It's actually something my wife experienced. But she went to a conference for an essential oils thing that she was doing. The company will remain nameless. And what they did around this conference was they had oversized bottles of their essential oils, just a three-dimensional, representation of one of their bottles, 6 feet tall, and they kind of had them scattered around the convention center. Now, to me, that would be completely arbitrary, because it's just, what's the meaning of it? It turns out that at this conference, those things were one of the biggest hits. Everybody wanted to get their selfie next to this thing, and everybody was taking pictures, and everybody was And ultimately, first of all, what it did is it all got posted. So that gave the company an incredible amount of free marketing that I don't know that they were planned for. But B is that it created this incredible sense of team and brand loyalty for everyone who was in attendance here. So, like I said, I had nothing to do with this. It's just anecdotal from what my wife told me coming home from this conference. But since I saw that, or since she told me about that, I have brought that into a lot of my thinking and said, so, all right, I'm always so business objective driven. But again, let's put ourselves in the seat of the audience. What are they looking for? And like I said, sometimes fun can be a business objective, and in this case, that fun of being a part of this brand was something the audience needed. And whether they knew it or not, they hit the nail on the head with these giant bottles. It seems arbitrary, but it turns out that it was really kind of an important part of the show.
That's what I was going to say. You first started out, it seemed arbitrary. A lot of times you'll look at something and it seems like, it's just sort of thrown in. I wonder if they had that objective. Oh, people are going to love this. Maybe they didn't know it was going to blow up on social, but that's something to definitely keep in mind, that sometimes we get so focused on the business strategy. There's also the fun strategy. There's the entertainment strategy. I know you're a funny person. I've followed you on Facebook. I know you have a sense of humor. How important is humor at a meeting? Is that arbitrary or is that strategic?
It depends. It very much depends. And I think that it depends largely on the culture of the client company. There are certain companies where they want to have fun and they want their leadership to be approachable and personable. And that's the objective. They want to build that relationship with the audience. Very often when there's new leadership in place, they want to present themselves as someone you can approach, someone you can really feel like you're on a team with. And in those situations, I think that it absolutely can be an objective. Absolutely can be a business objective. It's hard to achieve unless someone like you comes along. A lot of times an executive will want to inject humor into their speech. And you're not dealing with professional actors, you're not dealing with professional comedians, you're dealing with professional business people, some of whom can be hilarious. But you really need to understand a client well before you go down that road. And you need to understand the kind of humor that they will be okay with. Because I have found that when you're dealing with corporate executives who want to be funny, you either can go the kind of punny slapstick route where it's just the wordplay that really is carrying the weight, or you can go the visual route where it's up to our artists to bring in either Photoshop bits or video bits or things where the requirement for the funny isn't solely in the lap of the executive. You really do need to be careful in how you protect them in a comedic environment, or call up Scott Bloom.
Or call Scott Bloom. I always say that seems to be the one thing everyone should have on the top of their to-do list. But speaking of, I like what you're saying about humor, because we find, or I found, that a lot of the executives that are funny, they're naturally funny. They just have that charisma. And for them to try to hack their way through something that they didn't write or that they can't really present, can also be, awkward. But you do need to have, some bit of engagement from an entertainment standpoint. Do you build that in? Is that something you naturally say, hey, we've driven this message here. We need to lighten up a little bit. Is there go-tos that you have or ideas based on the strategy to give it a little bit more entertainment, a little bit more fun, or is everything serious?
Well, no, I think that entertainment can take a lot of different forms, humor and levity being one. I think that, a very powerful, let's say you're working in pharmaceuticals and let's say you're working in a juvenile oncology drug. You're not going to be looking to bring in humor. Well, you could. Actually, you could. I shouldn't say that as a blanket statement, but it wouldn't necessarily be your immediate go-to. And so you can bring in entertainment in a powerful story. You can bring in entertainment in a lot of other ways, or in motivation, in metaphors of strength and of, unity and of power, and a very meaningful and powerful media experience that doesn't lean on humor. So it depends so much on, it's going to be a broken record, going back to the company culture, going back to the culture of the executive who you're working with or executive team you're working with, going back to the business objectives of the meeting, going back to the topic, the content of the meeting. And everything is really like I don't know that there is necessarily that route that I would normally take. It kind of, each one develops based on those early and initial conversations as to what's the right thing here.
As opposed to having a template and going, oh, I know I need to put something in here. Everything's sort of being created organically.
And to that point, one of the things that I hear over and over and over again when you've got that first kickoff meeting with a team where it's a repeat from the prior year, let's say, someone will always say, well, let's look at what we did last year. And I hate that. Because that's what we did last year. To a certain extent, I don't care what we did last year. I do care. Oh, well, we can't bring in Cirque because they had Cirque last year. Okay, that I care about. But I want to start with a blank slate and really kind of dig into this year. And then once we've got our plan, we can go back and say, okay, so what worked with this group? It's a good way to learn about an audience. They hated this. They loved that. You can learn those kinds of things from prior experience. But I just don't feel like it should be the first conversation.
So where do you see the event industry going in the future? What are some headwinds, some tailwinds to plan for?
A lot of it is things that I think you would have heard over and over again. I think that there's been so much talk about hybrid events and virtual events and where people are and all of these things. And I think that they come down to really one thing, which we've also already talked about, which is benefit to the audience. And how are they going to walk away saying, yeah, that was really worth my time? And that may mean a virtual event because you just don't want to take them out of the field, or that may be a hybrid event because there are those people that really need to be there, but the support services can tune in from home, or it may be a fully live event. But I think that across any of those formats and permutations, it's going to be a lot more self-driven. I think people want to have, people are so used to Netflix and Amazon Prime or Prime Video and all these things where they choose what they want to watch. It's not that you flip on NBC and you wait for the show you want to come on. You pick what you want to watch when you want to watch it. And that kind of self-direction, I think, is going to make its way even more into live events. I think shorter general sessions. No one wants to sit for 2 hours anymore and listen to 8 presenters talk for 20 minutes. I think general sessions will be pointed and short and will introduce topics that you can then go explore on your own throughout the rest of the event. And so I think it's more of that true customization of experience where a lot of content will be taken out of general sessions or even breakouts and be given an interactive space where you can explore, learn. And what that will ultimately do, like we have been talking about, where you want somebody to leave saying that was impactful, it will let each individual person self-assess and say, this is where I need to develop. This is where I need to work on my skills. This is where I need to work on my knowledge. And what might be right for me may not be right for anyone else in attendance. So that gives me the ability to truly customize my experience and seek out those experiences that will help me be better at my job when I get back home.
Yeah, I think you're talking about having more curated experiences where they get to choose what will benefit them, and then they are responsible for getting the most out of it, as opposed to we're saying, this is what we think. We're giving you many options. You choose what's best for you.
And curated or even uncurated. As we move, we touched briefly earlier on AI, but as that starts to develop, imagine what could be achieved where it is not curated, but literally people could walk into what would be an exhibit hall, but it's all experiences for this internal group. And they can go up to a kiosk where they literally get a customized lesson plan or a customized experience for inputs they put in. And nobody curates it, but it is all driven off of some central database of knowledge that they all should have. I mean, who knows?
That's going to be crazy. That's going to be wild. Often people ask about how to make an event a 10 out of 10. I like to ask the guests this question. In your mind, what does a 11 out of a 10 look like at an event?
An 11 out of 10. I think an 11 out of 10 would be an event where everyone has fun, first of all, on the production side, on the client side, in the development, in the lead up, where everyone's truly enjoying the partnership. It's critical for an 11 out of 10. One where the client really feels like their messages and objectives were presented in a way that felt intuitive and organically right for their personality, and where those messages were directly aligned with the needs of the audience, and that those needs are met in such a way where you can see true functional improvement in that audience's performance afterwards as a result.
Hey, you just summarized the podcast for me. You have to figure out, how do I put an amalgam of everything we talked about? That's exactly what, if someone just listened to the last 2 minutes of this podcast, they'd get everything that they needed. So this has been great because you really do have a good mind for this. You have a great disposition and personality to meet the client's needs, to really be collaborative, really work with them, and really try not only to get the best creative vision that you have, but to start from the client's vision and being able to support that. So I look forward to the next time we can work. Thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Can't wait.
That's it for now. I've been your host, Scott Bloom, corporate event MC and comedic keynote speaker. And of course, your connoisseur of connections. Oh, by the way, if you're interested, you can book me for your next event on eSpeakers Marketplace at espeakers.com/marketplace. And if you like what you heard, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you loved what you heard, drop us a review and don't forget to share with your friends. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers. Thanks so much for listening. Now go out and make your event a great one.